Hello and welcome back to Educator.com's course on music history. We've made it to a round of the symphony, so let's just jump in and talk about the symphony. All right, so the symphony was a much later developing form than, say, some of the vocal forms like opera and whatnot. So since it's later developing, we're talking into the 1700s here. It sort of came from the Italian overture, which was part of opera. And the Italian overture, overture being the beginning of the opera, so it's just the orchestra. So it just featured the symphony orchestra. And so the composers began to, just like they've done with everything we've talked about, sort of tweak that and pulled it out and stretched it. And so it sort of came from there. Now I mentioned Concerto Grosso and Solo Sonata because you're going to see like those influences in the symphony, because Concerto Grosso we talked about being basically a feature of a few instruments and the rest of the ensemble, but it's instrumental. Solo Sonata, again, instrumental. And so all these forms sort of lead to the development of the symphony as a pure form or a pure genre. So a traditional symphony, you go to an orchestra concert and they're doing some symphony by X composer. It's going to be 4 movements, typically. Okay, when I say typically, I mean on average, 90% of the time. Yeah, sometimes we have 5 movements, sometimes we have more, but 4. And there's sort of a reason behind that we're going to talk about a little later, but basically they're tonally connected. And what I mean when I say tonally connected, that means there's a home base. And like the first symphony, or the first movement of the symphony, I should say, remember sonata. Sonata form comes back. It's probably in sonata form, and it's going to kind of center around this tonic. Like if it's a symphony in E flat major, the first movement is probably going to be in E flat. And so then we sort of have these different movements, different takes on this larger scale harmonic kind of progression. So the classical symphony, you have to talk about Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, of course, the 3 guys that come back time and time and time and time again. What I find interesting is that we talk about these 3 so much, but they were just like, like 50 years, 75 years of music history is just these 3 guys. What about the other hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years? We just kind of focus on them. But they were big players, and that's why we talk about them. You see here, Haydn, 104 symphonies. That's a lot of symphonies. Mozart, 41. Beethoven, 9. Professor Hills, none yet. But as you can see, the numbers are going down as the time sort of progresses. So Haydn being older than Mozart, writes 104 because he's a little more in that Baroque period where there's a little more of a formulaic spin on things, this sort of, dare I say, plug and chug routine. Mozart, 41, okay, spending a little more time on themes and connecting things and focusing on the instrumentation. Beethoven, 9. Why? Because he was an obsessive fool, and he fooled around with these 9 symphonies forever, but the innovations that we garnered from them are really legendary.